Rudy is a stupid and ugly loser who gets reincarnated in the body of a baby with addiction to huge melons. He is reborn with the ability to learn powerful magic and makes a harem for himself. Unfortunately, he can't explore his fantasies because his magnum doesn't let him before he was reborn. A group of policemen rush to an accident scene to find an ugly-ass fatty who was just hit by a truck. While being taken to a hospital, he hears some voices around him. Even at the brink of death, all the dumbhead could think about was the fact that he wishes he had lost his virginity before he died. Shortly after, the dummy wakes up to find himself amidst three strange faces, who look at him like they're about to eat him up. Just then, he realizes that they are speaking a totally different language, and imagines that this could be the death of Hades. Immediately, the man amongst them kisses him and carries him, making him wonder how this is possible since he is a full-grown fatsie. Looking around, he sees a beautiful woman with delightfully huge melons, which gives him a different goal in life: to make sure he touches it.
Really, nigga?
While trying to do so, the idiot realizes that his hands are the size of his sausage, and this freaks him out. This causes him to figure out that he has been reincarnated into the body of a baby, and the names of his parents are Paul and Zenith. Even after realizing this, he isn't so shocked, and finds himself being jealous of his new parents, since they have a life his loser self never had. Also, he happened to be older than them, as he was 34 before he got here, which made them more like teenagers to him. He, however, consoles himself with the fact that Zenith's succulent melons are all his, even though he didn't seem to be turned on by them while sucking. This causes him to conclude that he must have felt that way because she is his mother. The couple named the baby Rudius, and since it was so weird, it got shortened to Rudy. As the months went by, Rudy began to understand the language and got to know more about his parents. Even as a child, his pervy instincts remain as he takes the underwear belonging to the family's maid, Lilia, and uses it as a mask. As he grew a little older, he paid more attention to his surroundings. By doing this, he notices his father practicing swordsmanship and assumes that he is now in Europe. Since there clearly isn't something interesting to do for fun, he realizes that there are no computers in this world. The disappointment leads him to fall off a table and hit his head on the ground. Seeing this, Zenith rushes to him, worried that he had hurt himself. She uses her healing magic to make sure he doesn't feel any pain. This leaves him thrilled. He realizes that he is now in a world with regard for magic and swords. As he grows much older, he finds the only 3 books in the house and decides to read them. These books happen to be about magic. Curious to know more, he begins to apply what he reads by trying the incantations and spells in the book. In a short time, he realizes that he has the ability to use magic. The thrill of something new leads him to continue his practice, but in secret. One day, while practicing, he tries out an incantation which causes a large explosion, leaving a large hole in the house. Rushing to the place, they find out that he has been practicing magic, and his mother is very happy about this, since she believes that he is talented. Even though Paul had wanted Rudy to be more focused on swordsmanship since he was a boy, the two came to a conclusion that he could learn both. To help him with his magic, they decide to employ a tutor for him. When she arrives, they are surprised to see a slightly grown Powerpuff Girl. Rudy, on the other hand, is not impressed with how tiny her oranges are, but believes this is because she is young. The tutor introduces herself as Roxy, and after spending time with Rudy, she realizes that he has potential both in clapping and magic. Shortly after, Paul and Zenith throw a welcome party for Roxy, and she gets more comfortable with everyone. The next day, while playing with some dolls in the evening, Rudy instantly has a flashback of his accident in his previous life. The thought of this is interrupted by the loud happy noises his parents make while working out. The weirdo hopes that this encounter will give him a little sister, since he was already tired of the annoying little brothers he had in his past life, who had thrown him out on the streets some hours before he died. Just then he decides to prank his parents by interrupting their workout and asking them what they are doing, while hoping to hear the excuses they would try to come up with. When he comes out of his room, he sees Roxy fantasizing about her own workout session, and this causes him to halt his plan. He doesn't blame her for this, since he believes she is just growing. After 6 months under Roxy's tutoring, Rudy gets better in magic and progresses to intermediate level. During one of their night classes, Roxy reads a magic book to Rudy, who spends his time trying to get a glimpse of Roxy's floodgate. Meanwhile, Roxy reveals that she is a demon, which explains why his parents looked at her in a weird way when she first came. While she looked like a human, her hair color gave her away. She assures him that she isn't harmful and warns him not to go close to anyone with green hair, and a red gem on their forehead, as they are very harmful. On the other hand, Rudy compliments Roxy's hair and tells her he likes her, but she figures it would be child abuse to see any meaning in it. She tells him to keep the compliment for a girl he likes, and tell her if he feels the same way in 10 years. A year later, Rudy improves a lot in his magic but falls behind in his swordsmanship. Later that day, he watches the field and finds some children playing. When they turn to look at him, he immediately freaks out as this reminds him of the humiliation he had experienced in school in his past life. Meanwhile, seeing that Rudy has a lot of potential, Roxy recommends a school of magic called Rano University of Magic. While contemplating on this, Rudy becomes 5 years old and finds out that birthdays in this world are celebrated every 5 years. As a birthday gift, Paul gives him a sword. Zenith gives him a magic book and Roxy gives him a magic stone, while also announcing that his graduation exam would be held the next day. The following day, Roxy takes Rudy to a cozy spot where they can be alone. She performs a complex spell and instructs him to do the same, which ends up being far greater than she had ever seen. Passing this test made him a saint-level wearer mage. Since her work here is done, Roxy decides to lead the family. As much as Rudy's parents try to convince her, her mind had already been made up. She hands Rudy a charm from her hometown as a parting gift and hopes to see him again someday. In return, Rudy thanks her for helping him in various ways, and the two bid each other farewell. Days later, Rudy gets caught by Lilia with Roxy's underwear.
Yep.
He hoped she would keep this secret from his nosy parents. The next day, Rudy heads out to ask his parents for permission to go out and play. He clearly has been healed from his past life trauma, which stopped him from going out. Since this is the first time he is making such a request, his parents are pleased to let him go. Paul carries him on his neck, while advising him to use his powers only to protect the weak. Then, he sends Rudy off. For the first time since arriving in this new world, Rudy gets to see the village. He is thrilled at how beautiful it looks. Shortly after, he decides to read while being thankful for the arrival of Roxy in his life. While taking a walk, Rudy sees 3 boys bullying another and referring to him as a demon. At first, he chooses to mind his business, but upon realizing that the 3 boys will not stop, he steps up like a top G and yells at them to stop. However, they ignore him. This causes him to use his magic to fire water balls at them. In return, they try to throw stones at him, but he dodges their attack, leaving them with no option but to retreat. When Rudy approaches the boy, he discovers that he is a boy with green hair, which is almost identical to the kind of demons Roxy had told him to avoid. To confirm, he opts to check the boy's forehead and sees that the coast is clear. He helps the boy to dry his hair, while admiring how handsome he looks. When he asks about why the boy's hair is green, he reveals that his father is half-elf. Then he states that his name is Self, and Rudy offers to be friends with him. Since Sylph has witnessed Rudy's magic, he tells Rudy that he wants to learn magic, and Rudy is more than pleased to teach him. With night approaching, the two exchange goodbyes and head home to their parents. On getting home, Paul angrily questions Rudy about the boy he had fired the water ball at. Apparently, the boy had come with his parents and told Paul a completely different story, blaming Rudy for this. While Rudy tries to explain what happened to his father, Paul hits him in the face. When he eventually explains what happened, Paul feels very bad for not listening to him at first. The next day, while Rudy and Sylph are playing in the fields, it suddenly starts to rain. Since they were closer to Rudy's house at that moment, he decides to take Sylph home. On getting home, Rudy goes to have his bath and urges Sylph to join him. He notices after taking his birth form that Sylph refuses to do the same. This causes him to forcefully take Sylph's clothes off. Shockingly, he realizes that Sylph is a girl. Insert it was at this moment, Paul after being forced into a striptease, Sylph begins to cry loudly. This gets the attention of Paul and Zenith, who rush to find them in this situation. Paul reveals that Sylph's real name is actually Sylphiette, and urges his son to man up and apologize to Sylph. Watching how Rudy does this, he wonders how his son could be as dumb as this. Eventually, Sylph forgives him, leaving Paul in awe as to what he is teaching his son at such a young age. Months later, Zenith announces that she is pregnant and everyone is happy. Rudy, who had thought she would not be able to give birth to another child for some weird reason, is more excited. All the family celebrates this news with dinner. Lilia drops a bomb by revealing she is pregnant too. This shocks everyone to their bones since there could only be one culprit who could be the father, and that was Paul.
My disappointment. Yep.
On hearing this, Zenith is devastated. She thinks about what to do, while Paul sobs in a corner, disappointed in himself. When she asks Lilia what her plans for the baby are, she reveals that she intends to go back to her hometown after helping with her own child. Since Lilia has been so much help to Rudy, he doesn't want her to go. Therefore, he pleads with his mother to let her stay, claiming his father for making Lilia develop plot with him. Since he had planned out his statement well, Zenith listens to him and lets Lilia stay. Then she threatens to have a long conversation about this with Paul, who is now scared for his life. Contrary to Rudy's claim, Lilia was the one who seduced Paul by making him see how juicy her melons are. Since Rudy was the reason she remained in the house, she devotes herself to repaying his kindness. Months later, the babies are born and are named Norn and Aisha. Since the incident that night, Lilia and Rudy grew closer and started talking more often. He also had a discussion with his father, seeking to know what the unfaithful idiot cheated on his mother. In his defense, Paul expects Rudy to understand him as a man. He brings up the suggestion of school, leaving Rudy deep in thought. Later that day, Rudy tells Sylph about his decision to go to school, but she cries and pleads with him not to leave her. Days later, he receives a letter from Roxy, telling him about how she is doing and how her new student is so much like him, since he loved to peep at her floodgate. This causes him to be reminded of Roxy's suggestion that he tries out the University of Magic. That night, he brings this up to his father, asking that his father also allows Sylph to go with him and pay for her fees. When his father explains why this is not possible, Rudy asks that Paul get him a job so he can afford Sylph's fees. The next day, Paul receives a visitor, who happens to be a beast woman with beast-like cannons named Ghislaine. While Rudy still tries to figure out what is going on, Paul throws him into the field and the two do battle. As much as Rudy tries to use his magic powers to shield himself from his father's attacks, Paul's swordsmanship is unmatched, eventually leading him to knock Rudy out. When Rudy wakes up, he finds himself in a carriage, left to enjoy some alone time with the busy Ghislaine. When he introduces himself to her, she considers him to be too polite to be his father's son. Then, she reveals that he is now her little and that he will be working with her from now on. Since he was curious, Rudy asks Ghislaine if his father told her anything. She ignores his question and instead hands him a letter from his father, demanding that he reads it out loud since she cannot read. In the letter, his father reveals that he has gotten him a job to teach a 9-year-old girl named Ro. Also, Paul states that Rudy would be learning swordsmanship from Ghislaine, while she learns magic from him in return. His father had sent him far away for this job due to how overly dependent Sylph was on him. In the letter, Paul instructs him to get along with Ro, but keep his pervy sights off Ghislaine. On hearing this, Ghislaine demands that Rudy send the letter to Zenith. When they arrive at Ro's house, they see that it is an incredibly huge mansion, with beast people as servants. Shortly after, a man comes out and educates Rudy on how to greet like a noble, after seeing how badly he was at it. He introduces himself as Philip, who happens to be Paul's cousin. After their introduction, Philip leads Rudy to meet his daughter Eris. Seeing him, she is pissed because he is younger than her. When Rudy tries to let her know that he knows more than her, she leaves a mark of her hand on his face. Rudy returns the favor immediately, leading to a brief battle of supremacy between the two youngsters. Fortunately, he is able to escape his angry wife and goes to meet Philip. Philip expects that he would give up after seeing how rude the girl is, but he is determined to win her over. He figures out a plan to make Eris study, and Philip offers to help. While the two are in a place where they are supposed to study, a man arrives and begins to beat them up. Rudy assumes that this is just a test, but soon figures out how real this is when he sees how much the man had made Eris bleed. When he leaves, Rudy heals Eris and tries to figure out a way to escape the men. At this point, Eris is still weak, and she begs him to help her. Seeing this as an opportunity, Rudy makes Eris promise not to be violent towards him anymore. After she makes the promise, Rudy helps her out and they are able to escape. He heals her completely, and since she now has her strength back, she switches to her violent ways. In a brief moment, she hears the voice of her kidnappers and runs to meet Rudy. Fortunately, they find their way back to the mansion. On their way back, Eris relieves the experience of being kidnapped, as she gets taken away again. This time, Rudy runs after them and uses his powers against the men. When one of the men attempts to finish them off with a sword technique, Ghislaine appears and sends them all to the underworld in one slash. When they return home, Rudy believes he has failed as Eris' teacher since he wasn't able to protect her, but she thinks otherwise. Eris tells him that she has accepted him and gives him permission to call her by her name. Upon hearing this, Rudy is excited. He is pleased to have landed his first ever job, and not be the useless idiot he knows he is. The next day, Rudy apologizes to Philip for what had happened to Eris, claiming it was his fault. He seeks to know what the men wanted Eris for. In response, Philip reveals that the men had probably intended to use Eris for political or physical gains. While they talk, a woman walks in, and Rudy figures she would be Philip's wife. He tries to greet her, but she snubs him. Just then, another man walks in. When Rudy greets him, the man thinks Rudy is too polite to be Paul's son. This man happens to be Soros, Philip's father, and the leaders of Fito. He beats Philip up for not appreciating Rudy enough for saving his daughter. Seeing him act up, Rudy figures Eris definitely got her rusty character from the rusty old man. Soros had come to ask Rudy to teach Eris magic, but he believes Eris should be able to do so herself. Soros agrees and calls Eris loudly. When she arrives, she expects that he would have sealed the deal, but is shocked when he tells her to ask Rudy herself. Since she didn't want to ask him plainly, she decides to do it the beast way, which Rudy finds very confusing. At that moment, the butler explains that she is only imitating the dropping hair pose of the beast people when asking for something politely. Realizing this, he accepts. Days later, Rudy begins to tutor Eris. While doing so, he gets swordsmanship lessons from Ghislaine and teaches her how to count and read in return. Meanwhile, Eris tries a fire-emitting spell, hoping to be able to make huge fireworks like him. As much as Rudy would love this, he hopes she would be more enthusiastic about reading and writing. A month of teaching passes by, and Eris pays less attention to her training. One day, Rudy finds her sleeping in a barn. Being a direct descendant of the pervy Paul, he decides to check the size of her balloons and ends up trying to have a clear view of her floodgate. Just as he is about to succeed, Eris wakes up. She punches him and beats him up. To redeem himself, Rudy plots with Ghislaine to tell Eris how he was able to help her learn to read and write. While Ghislaine narrates her ordeal, Eris reconsiders having Rudy as her tutor. Later that day, Rudy heads into the city with the two b****s. He uses the prices of things to teach the girls some calculations. On their way back, they inform Rudy about the flying dragon home. Since this sounds interesting, he hopes to go there one day. As the days go by, Eris becomes better with her studies. In appreciation, she gives Rudy a medicine, which one trader had tried to make him buy the day before. He sees this as a good gift for his father, and she reveals that she used part of her allowance to get it for him. When she asks him what it is used for, he avoids the question. Just then, the medicine splits and calls out the name aphrodisiac, making Eris wonder what the word means. While they train, Ghislaine seems very optimistic that she would increase her rank, considering how much effort she is putting into training. Meanwhile, Rudy finally finishes the statue he was sculpting. While taking a look at it, he hears a knock on the door. Going to see who it is, he realizes that it is Edna. She tells him that Eris's birthday is coming soon, and Rudy thinks that this is a chance to give Eris a good time. Later on, he follows Philip to the library since he wishes to learn other languages. When Philip notices that Rudy has picked a book in beast language, he seizes the opportunity to tell him about the benefits of studying the language, one of which is unlimited access to freaky beast girls. Since Rudy had wanted to study many languages, Philip grants him permission to borrow as many books as he wants. While trying to study, he hears a loud noise outside. Looking there, he realizes that it is Eris. Apparently, she finds it hard to learn how to dance. Due to this, Rudy goes to her, promising to help her out. After much thought, Eris listens to him and thanks him with a knock in the head. Then, she tells him to follow her, while the two resume her dance practice. While they crack eyes, Rudy realizes that she is moving too fast and dancing like an idiot. When he points this out to her, she swings him across the room like a worthless piece of rag. Days later, he gets another letter from Roxy, which he is pleased with. Meanwhile, the day of Eris's birthday party is here, and she is made to dance with a random ass boy. When she begins to go as fast like she always does, the two fall down, making everyone laugh at her. Rudy steps up like a prince, charming to help a damsel in distress. He offers to dance with her in the way that they have practiced. This time, she impresses the audience and is pleased. Watching them, Edna is surprised and seeks to know how he was able to do this. In the meantime, the other girls at the party rush over to Rudy, seeking to know how old he is and if he is free for clapping later. That night, they go to bed and Rudy wakes up to realize that Eris had slept off beside him. He attempts to feel her juicy melons, but she notices this and walks out. Just then, he discovers that some people are working out in a tower and decides to have a look. Shockingly, they are Soros and a sexy freaky beast maid. Meanwhile, Rudy realizes he finds studying other languages more fun than studying English in his previous life. Then he decides to go watch Eris train, where he finds out that she has reached an advanced rank through her training. Later that day, while coming out of the house, Rudy sees Eris and some maids talking about him and trying to carry something into the kitchen, which they obviously do not want him to see. Seeing this, he decides to sneak into the kitchen to see what they are hiding. Eavesdropping on their conversations, Rudy finds out they are planning something for his upcoming birthday, which surprises him and he leaves the place. The next day in his room, Rudy notices that everyone seems to be busy, while Ghislaine is in his room too, trying to keep his company by telling him how proud she is that he has successfully learned 2 languages in 2 years. Soon, Rudy tells her he is hungry and would like to grab some snacks, but at that moment, Ghislaine quickly blocks the door and tells him they should talk more. Seeing this, Rudy realizes the day is the D-Day and decides to play along by showing a sculpture she made of her with her tail missing. Knowing she would do anything to keep him indoors, his perverted self tells Ghislaine to show him her round-ass and the base of her tail to finish his sculpture, which she did without hesitation. While being jerked by touching her strong backside, a maid suddenly comes in to inform him of dinner and sees them. Meanwhile, this happens to be a way to call Rudy to the hall where he is surprised with a birthday party and begins to cry, even though he already knows of the plan. There, everyone begins to feel bad for him because his parents are unable to attend his 10th birthday because of the monsters acting up and being shit. Suddenly, Eris' mother comes to hug him, even though everyone knows she hates him. Surprisingly, she promises to adopt and also asks him to marry Eris, which makes the guards drag her for creating a scene. At that moment, Eris instructs Rudy to be given a gift, which happens to be an expensive-looking staff, since a great mage, and it is weird he does not have a staff. Then she commands that the party begins, and everyone gets to have lots of fun. At night, after the party, Rudy gets to talk with Philip, who tells him about what happens in the Boreas family, and he also wants Rudy to marry Eris and take over the succession of the family. To do this, he tells Rudy he would leave Eris with her tied in his bed tonight. But Rudy decides to ignore the offer by saying he needs to go to bed. On his way, Rudy begins to regret his decision of declining Philip's offer, as he would have had the opportunity to get his own maids. However, getting to his room, he finds Eris there and knows it must be Philip's plan. Seeing her, he begins to think of how his first time with her is going to be by trying to touch her floodgate, but stops instantly. But then, she tells him she would accept anything he wants as long as it is just a little. Unfortunately for him, he decides to take his decision by making advances to have a nice time with her, which gets her angry and makes her beat him, leaving him on the ground as she storms out. Soon, she comes back to apologize for her actions and tells him to wait another 5 years, become a proper adult, before they can do whatever they want. Hearing this, Rudy becomes very excited about Eris' promise and can't wait for 5 years to come. Meanwhile, Rudy's father is on his way trying to go for his son's birthday, but keeps getting attacked by monsters. Days later, Rudy, Eris, and Ghislaine decide to go far away from the city for Rudy to cast spells. Suddenly, Rudy notices a cloud gathering with lots of mana, which catches the attention of some town leaders, who send people to go find the location and kill anyone. While still wondering where the mana is from, they are suddenly attacked by Almanfi, the strongest Pelagius servant, but Ghislaine is able to block all his attacks after seeing that Rudy is his sim. There he reveals his mission to kill whoever is responsible for the mana. Suddenly, while they talk, the mana energy explodes from the sky and consumes them, even when they try to run away. After this incident, Rudy wakes up to find himself in a place that seems like heaven in his old body, and meets with an all-white goofy-like person, who introduces himself as the man-god. There, the man-god tells him that his physical body is okay, while he is in his mental form right now. While talking, the man-god tells him he is going to die due to how harsh the demon continent is, and he is caught up in a massive mana disaster, which transported him all the way across the world to the demon continent. Hearing this, Rudy is shocked as he remembers the light that consumed him and his friends, referring to the light that he got dragged into, and he asks him what he can do. However, he asks what he can do to help himself, and the man-god tells him that by the time he wakes up, there will be a man nearby who he must rely on and also help. Suddenly, Rudy wakes up from his dream in his normal self, and sees that he is back to his normal form with Eris still sleeping by his side. While trying to look around for Ghislaine, he suddenly sees a man behind a fire, whom he recognizes as a superd and tries to attack out of fear. But then, seeing how unbothered the man is, Rudy approaches him to introduce himself since he can speak demon language. There, the man named Ruchard tells him he and Eris fell from the sky and he made them fire to keep them from the cold. Then Rudy proceeds to ask where they are, to which the man says they are in the demon continent, which surprises him, and they begin to have conversations. Suddenly, Eris wakes up from her sleep and is frightened on seeing Ruchard, as she begins to cry and shout. Seeing this, Ruchard tells Rudy that Eris' reaction is normal, as everyone believes he is dangerous, but Rudy is very different. Soon, Ruchard tries to be nice to Eris by building trust between them. Then he asks if they can become friends, which she agrees to, and they become close friends. Then, Rudy begins to think of how to make sure he gets Eris home. The following morning, they go up to a mountain where they see the demon continent's vast land, which Eris excitedly sees as the start of an adventure, and begin their journey. After stopping to rest for a while, Rudy and Eris get to see Ruchard kill a monster, and Eris begins to ask how he knew the monster was there as they continue their journey. There he replies to her by saying he can see the monsters with the eye in his forehead, which he has always wished he did not have. Shortly after, they arrive at the Migard tribe village where a boy named Rowan refuses to let Ruby and Eris in. Eventually, Ruchard gets to convince him, which makes him decide to call the chief, whom Ruchard says will let them in once they talk. Soon, the chief arrives and Rudy greets him, which makes him appreciate his politeness and the fact that he can speak demon language. But then the chief notices the pendant on Rudy's neck and asks where he got it, which he says is from his master Roxy. Hearing this, everyone is surprised as this place happens to be Roxy's hometown, and the man, who happens to follow the chief, says Roxy is his daughter's name. While taking Rudy around the village, Roxy's father asks if his daughter is safe and where she is. Rudy tells him she is okay, and her letter state is in Shiron Kingdom, which makes him happy on hearing that his daughter is fine. At night after dinner, and while Rudy puts Eris to sleep, the chief asks how they will get home, to which Ruchard says he will go with them to protect them and have them get home safe. Then, the chief begins to talk about Ruchard's tribe reputation, which makes Rudy ask what happened that made everyone think that Ruchard's tribe is dangerous. Then, Ruchard gets to tell him about the dark side of his tribe that happened a long time ago, which surprises him. After being told the tragic story, Rudy promises to help him restore his tribe's reputation. The next while they are about to leave, Roxy's parents decide to bid them farewell by giving Rudy gifts as a reward for letting them know that their daughter is safe. Then, they continue on their journey as Rudy tells Ruchard he looks forward to traveling with him. On their way, they encounter some monsters, which Eris is able to destroy in a jiffy with the sword given to her, and Rudy tells her that she could have left it to them. Soon at night, they begin to eat, but only Rudy is able to have the beef of the monster she kills, which makes Rudy cry inside himself that he needs to eat rice and beef. However, they continue on their journey to Reincarnation the next day, where they see the entry gate heavily guarded by demons, and overhears them talking about the outlaw and criminal dead end, which Ruchard says is one of the names he is known by. Seeing this, they begin to wonder how to get Ruchard past the gate. At that moment, Rudy sees a jelly paint and comes up with an idea of painting Ruchard's initial green hair to blue. Successful, they are able to pass through and are amazed to see the beautiful city behind the gate. Walking around, Rudy believes there is an adventurers guild in the city for them to make some money and head there. Getting to the adventurers guild, Rudy comes up with a plan to test if the adventurers would recognize Ruchard, but they do not, as they begin to laugh at him. Seeing this, Rudy believes that his disguise plan worked. Then they proceed to sign up for the adventurers guild, where they realize they cannot be given certain jobs, as they have not gotten to the required rank. There, one of the adventurers approaches Rudy and tells him to take the job of looking for a lost kitten, which gets him angry, and they leave the guild. On their way, Eris begins to ask why he did not take any job, as she is eager to slay a dragon. After walking around the city, they decide to rest for the day, which makes Rudy rent a room in an inn for them, as they would be busy as from the following day. At that moment, some adventurers come into the inn and a girl among them asks Eris to eat with them since they are all new adventurers. However, Eris decides to ignore her, but it leads to her mistakenly spoiling the button of the clothes Rudy gave her, which makes her beat the girl up. Seeing this, Rudy immediately stops her and helps heal the adventurer named Kurt. Later that night, while Rudy sleeps, he finds himself with the man god again, who tells him to take the job of finding the lost kitten, as it will be a way to put an end to his worries. Suddenly, at that moment, he wakes up from his dream and sees Eris awake too and goes to sit with her. There he finds out she is worried about whether they would make it home, which makes Rudy assure her they will. The next day, they set out in search of the lost kitten, and with Rogers' help, they are able to locate a cave where they see a huge cat, which is supposed to be the kitten. Seeing this, Rudy realizes that everything seems bigger in the demon continent.
That's what she said!
Suddenly, the criminals that kidnapped the animals to get money arrive in the cave, which makes Rudy and the others hide in the dark and are able to have the criminals trapped with spells. However, while trying to ask the criminals a question, Rudy gets kicked off by one of them. Seeing this, Richard becomes angry and cuts off the criminal's head, shocking everyone. Shocked at Richard's action, Rudy asks why he did that, and he replies it is because the criminal is evil for hurting a child. Hearing this, Rudy tells him not to kill anyone again. Then he asks the two other criminals, who happen to be adventurers of their ranks, and tells them to join his team so as to spare their lives. Hearing this, Richard becomes furious and asks why Rudy would want to team up with villains, which he said is a good idea for them to get good jobs. However, Richard insists on not working with the bad ones, which makes Eris begin to hit him as she talks to them about how Rudy is doing all this for their sake, until Rudy tells her to stop talking. Eventually, Richard decides to succumb to the idea. The following day outside the guild, Rudy trades jobs with the bad adventurers and asks them to spread the name, Dead End, and make it sound good by telling how good they behave. On getting to Rudy's village, Roxy sees how the village seems to be in a ruined state, which makes her quickly check the list of dead people. Fortunately, neither his name nor his family's names are there, which makes her calm. Then she sees a letter written by Paul to Roxy about what is happening. At that moment, she hears some people mentioning Paul in their conversations, which makes her approach them to ask if they know him. On the other hand, Rudy gets to receive a new task from the guild to investigate a mysterious monster, which Eris is happy about, and Richard mentions that if they slay the monster, they won't have to worry about money for a while. Getting to the forest, they realize that the same job has been given to two other teams. Seeing that the other adventurers do not want to share the rewards with them, Rudy also decides that they do first come, first serve. But then, Richard stops and tells them they have to help the other adventurers when they are in danger, which Rudy and Eris accept. Soon monsters begin to attack the adventurers, but Rudy tells Richard to wait a little longer for the adventurers to appreciate the rescue, so they can boost their reputation. But then, Rudy's plan seems to be the worst so far, as one of the adventurers ends up being killed by the monster's attack, which makes Richard and Eris quickly go save the others by killing the monsters. However, Richard is angry and goes to ask Rudy, who is now feeling bad about his decision, why he stopped them, as they could have saved the adventurer. But Kurt, one of the saved adventurers, goes to stop Richard to stop blaming Rudy. Soon, the adventurers leave the forest and proceed to carry out their task until suddenly they hear fight noises. Hearing this, they quickly hurry to the scene to see what is happening, but see dead adventurers who were attacked by a redwood cobra, which makes them wonder how the cobra got to this type of forest. Seeing this, Rudy decides that they stop the monster and save the adventurer in its mouth, which makes Eris tell them that her sword cannot affect the cobra, but yet they begin to battle the monster to save the adventurer. Fortunately, they are able to kill the cobra, but too late to save the adventurer, who ended up dead. On their way back to the city, they meet with an adventurer who does not like them, and he reveals that he knows they have been trading jobs with Jaleel and Visco. Shocked at this discovery, Rudy asks what he wants, and the greedy adventurer demands half of their monthly earnings for him to keep mute and not have their license taken from them. Hearing this, Rudy begins to think of what he has to do because they need money and must get Eris back home. Suddenly at that moment, Richard pours water on his head to wash off the coloring in his hair and reveals his true identity, which scares everyone off. Then he moves to lift the bad adventurer and warn him that their licenses must not be revoked, as they are leaving the city already. Suddenly, the city soldiers arrive to take him down, and he immediately escapes by jumping off. Leaving the city, Rudy and Eris go to find him. On seeing him, Rudy apologizes for being more concerned about making money and improving his Richard reputation, which Richard forgives him for anyways. The next day, Rudy and Eris wake up to see a dried land on Richard's head, as he has decided to shave his hair because it scares people, which they begin to laugh about. Then Rudy, while about to continue on their journey, decides that they talk about whatever decision they are to make, which at that moment makes them begin their first dead-end strategy meeting as they head to Azure Kingdom. Soon, a year has passed and Eris is already 13 years of age. However, Rudy decides to take her to an ocean for fun. Getting there, she runs to the water excitedly as this happens to be her first time seeing an ocean in person. There, she decides to have a taste of the water, which surprises her as she tells Rudy of how salty it is. Surprisingly, she tells Rudy of her plan to swim in the ocean, but seeing that she has no swimsuit, he asks how she is going to swim, to which she replies she does not need one. Hearing this, Rudy, seeing that she has begun to take off her clothes, begins to think that she wants to swim naked, which makes him laugh.
Did you pray today?
Seeing all this, Rudyard tells Eris not to swim in the ocean, which makes both Rudy and Eris decide to leave for a boat ride. Later, after the ride, they come across a man who asks if they are once called the Dead End, which makes Rudy feel suspicious. At that moment, Rudy looks back like he just saw someone he knows. Then they proceed to ask if the man can take them to their destination, to which he replies that it would cost them 2,000 green ore coins, which shocks Rudy. Later, they decide to go eat, and while they eat, Rudy begins a discussion about how much they have left. Because of this, Eris asks if this means they would have to leave Rudyard behind, but Rudy tells her that they would not do that. Then, Eris tells Rudy of her decision to think of a way out for them, which makes him also tell them to go think of what they can do and meet again the following day to talk about it. At night, Rudy, while thinking of a way out of their current situation, ends up falling asleep. However, he gets to meet with the man, God in his dream, who tells him to buy food from a particular food vendor, then walk down the back alley, because there is a surprise awaiting him there. Waking up the following morning, Eris decides to train with Rudyard, whom she is happy she is able to hit once after many attempts to defeat him. Meanwhile, Rudy decides to follow the instructions given to him when he suddenly sees a woman with colored hair and immediately recognizes her as Roxy, which makes him wonder what she is doing there. However, on getting to the alley, Rudy sees a beggar begging for food, as the person also complains of not being able to eat anything since after being reincarnated. Seeing this, Rudy believes this must be what the man God was talking about and gives the beggar the food he is carrying. The beggar, who after eating aggressively, removes her cover to reveal her identity as a demon. Then she introduces herself to Rudy as Kishrika, the great emperor of the demon world. Having introduced herself, Rudy bows to her, which makes her happy and gives him a demon eye in exchange for his loyalty, which she forcefully inserts in his eye. And on getting home, Rudy explains his encounter with Kishrika to Eris and Rudyard. The next day, Rudy decides to have a duel with Eris using his new demon eye. However, at the end of the duel, Rudy ends up defeating her, which makes her leave in anger as she says he is good at doing everything. Later, Rudy decides to challenge Rudyard in a duel, using his demon eye again, a few moments later. Unfortunately for him, Rudyard ends up beating him to stupor. At night, while in bed, Rudy thinks of the fact that he should be thinking of how to take Eris home, and not testing his strength. After thinking for a while, Rudy decides to go sell his staff, so as for them to have money to board the ship to where they need to be. On his way out, Rudyard, who already knows his plans, suddenly stops him, but Rudy ends up lying. However, Rudyard appreciates Rudy for helping him, even though he is a superd and promises to help him too. While they talk, suddenly, a man whom Rudy recognizes as the person he saved the previous day approaches them. There, the man introduces himself as Gallus Cleaner and thanks Rudy for helping him. In a bar, Elenilas and Talhand, the people Roxy met at Rudy's village, together with Roxy, sit at a table. There, Elenilas starts to admire the men around. Roxy tells her to focus on the reason why they are there instead, which is to look for Rudy's family. At that moment, Elenilas approaches some men and begins to ask them questions, acting all seductive. Seeing this, Roxy also tries to flaunt some skin to entice the men, just like Elenilas did. Later that night, Roxy discusses with Talhand and Elenilas about Rudy and also asks what type of person he was when they were in the same team, to which Talhand answers that he was a rascal. However, the three of them go to their room where they have a conversation about the new group they have been hearing of. Then they begin to wonder how the group would be, considering the name they are called. Later that night, Roxy talks again about their plans of looking for Rudy's family. However, Elenilas says Zenith would be fine on her own as she is a retired S-ranked adventurer. Then, Roxy believes Rudy would be easy for them to find, considering the type of person he is. In addition, she tells the need to make sure they find Lilia and Esha also, as soon as possible, which makes Elinale's promise to begin her search the following day. While spying on Ruchard and Eris, whom she believes are the dead end, she suddenly runs away on seeing Ruchard, a superd. Getting to the inn, Roxy is shocked to see Elinale developing plots with 5 men at the same time. The next morning, the three decide to leave the city for another. And on their way, Elinale explains why she had to have fun with 5 men, mainly because she is a freaky bitch who loves plot development. On the other hand, Gallus agrees to transport Ruchard in exchange for a favor, while Rudy and Eris go first. On the boat, Rudy begins to have naughty and perverted thoughts of being alone with Eris, who gets him interrupted by vomiting due to being seasick. Getting to their destination, Rudy tells Eris his plan to go get Ruchard. But before he leaves, he tells her about the wild thoughts he had earlier. Rudy, on getting to Ruchard, who is disguised as a captive, is being told about the fact that they have to save the beast children that were taken captive by bad men. To get this done, Ruchard removes his blindfold to reveal his identity to the bad guys and begins to kill them. While he does this, Rudy goes to save the 5 beast children. While leaving the place, one of the children tells Rudy they did not save the sacred beast that was captured with them. Hearing this, Rudy decides to volunteer to go rescue the beast. Getting to where the beast, which happens to be a huge dog, is locked up, Rudy quickly releases it, which makes it begin to play with him as he enjoys its fur. At that moment, a beast man comes to see him and casts a spell on Rudy, which prevents him from being able to move or talk. However, since Rudy is powerless, the beast man decides to take both Rudy and the sacred beast to his village. On their way out, he tells Rudy of the type of punishment that would probably be given to his sorry little ass. At the village, Rudy is locked up in a prison where he is given food, but makes fun of himself as he examines how nice the prison's attributes are after being stripped naked, leaving his mini sausage and rice cake bare. Soon, a lady comes to see him, whom he tries to explain his innocence to, but gets insulted instead as she pours cold water on his face. At that moment, behind to think of a way out, as he hopes they free him. However, Rudy begins to take note of the amount of day he had spent in the prison, as he assures himself that Ruchard and Eris will soon come for him. But then, he begins to think that probably something has happened to them, as it is taking them too long to come save him, but he decides to patiently wait for them. Days later, a man is brought to join Rudy in his prison, whom he welcomes, but the man is so surprised to see him without clothes. Then, Rudy warns the man not to disrespect him as he has been in the prison long before him. However, the man tells Rudy that he was brought to prison because he was caught cheating after being asked. Rudy also tells the man he was brought there because he hugged a dog, which makes the man tell him the crime he committed is the talk of the town, as he is now popular. However, the man introduces himself to Rudy as Geese. Then, out of curiosity, Rudy asks if he has seen a red-haired girl and a bald man looking for him in the city, but he tells him he did not. At night, Rudy and Geese begin to perceive smoke, and when they check outside, they find the entire place engulfed in flames. Seeing this, Rudy quickly makes a key using his spell, and unlocks the prison for them to escape to the city, which is also in flames. There, Rudy realizes they are being attacked by some men, who are also capturing young girls. Seeing this, Rudy decides to use it as an avenue for them to owe him a favor too, and tell Geese he would help them fight. At that moment, Rudy casts his rainfall magic to put out the burning flames. Seeing Rudy's help, the beast man who brought him to the prison tells him they have a talk after the whole fight. Then they both decide to go to save the children. There, Rudy runs into Gallus, who happens to be one of those behind the attack. He asks if Rudy is now on the beast people's side, but Rudy lies to him that he had used him and his team members as stepping stones to get to the beast people. Then he asks whether Rudy would like to join him, but he refuses, which makes Gallus want to take one of the girls hostage, but gets attacked by the beast man, whose chest he tears downward with his sword. Then, Gallus proceeds to take the girl away to his ship. At that moment, the beast dog suddenly arrives and attacks him. Using this opportunity, Rudy uses all his might to cast a spell, which causes an explosion, and he ends up defeating Gallus. Having done this, Rudy passes out from exhaustion. Waking up the next morning, Rudy sees Eris, Ruchard, and lots of people before him. Curious, he asks them where he is, which they tell him is the chief's house. However, Eris begins to gist Rudy of her encounters while he's not there, until suddenly Guys, the beast man and beast lady that locked Rudy up, arrives. There, they begin to beg him for what they did to him, as they would accept any punishment they are given. Later, Eris and Rudy discuss adventures and decide to brag about it when they get home. Meanwhile at home, Eris' grandfather, Lord Soros, is being sentenced to execution after being accused of being responsible for the teleportation disaster, and is relieved of his duty as Lord of Fito. Before his execution, he hoped and prayed for his granddaughter's happiness in life. Days later at the Beast Village, while Eris and two other Beast girls take their bath, Rudy spies on them and begins to imagine having a great time with them, until Jize catches him.
Yep.
And he apologizes for his wrongdoing. Meanwhile, Rudy spends most of his time playing with the sacred beast while Eris plays and teaches two Beast girls named Tona and Teresina, Guy's daughters, a new language, which makes Rudy proud of her. However, Jize notices the ring on Eris' finger and asks where she got it, to which she answers it was given to by Ghislaine, and asks if they know her since she is a beast. Hearing this, Guise tells them of how Ghislaine had neglected her responsibility toward her people by leaving them, and leaves the room. Sadly, Eris runs after him to tell how much Ghislaine has been of help to her as her master, and she respects her for that. At that moment, Rudy comes to console Eris, and also tells Guise how much Ghislaine is respected in their city. Later at night, Eris lies down and begins to look at the ring, recalling when Ghislaine gave it to her. At that moment, Tona and Teresina arrive and tell her how great Ghislaine was with them. Because of this, Eris also tells them how Ghislaine has helped her train so well. Then, Tona tells Eris of the fact that Ghislaine is Guy's younger sister. Soon, they all leave the place, unknown to them that Jai had eavesdropped on their conversations. However, Eris begins to train the girls in swordsmanship, while Rudy watches them. There, Jize joins Rudy and tells him how Tona can be so adamant whenever he tells her to train. Then he asks if it is true that Ghislaine is Eris' master, which he confirms. Also, he tells him she is also known as a Sword King, as well as telling him more about hers. Later in the day, while having lunch, Eris tells the girls she would be leaving soon, as the rainy season will soon be over, but they sadly tell her not to leave. On the other hand, while Rudy plays with the sacred beast, the Beast Lady comes in and tells him he is already getting attracted to the dog, but he tells her that it is not true. At that moment, Teresina comes to meet them about Tona and Eris are fighting. They find out they are fighting because she does not want Eris to leave. At night, Guise tells the two girls about Rudy and his team's departure the next day. There, he tells them about Ghislaine and what made her leave them, and also his regrets of not helping her when he ought to. Having said this, he tells Tona to learn from his mistake and apologize to Eris, which makes the girls leave to do so. However, Tona apologizes to Eris, who forgives her and shows them two dolls, as the three of them begin to laugh. Finally, it is the date of their departure, and the girls cry heavily on Eris' shoulder, who is also crying as goodbye. The village chief, however, thanks Rudy for his good deeds, as well as shaking hands with Rudyard. Surprisingly, Jize challenges Eris to a duel to have a feel of what his sister had taught her before their departure. Soon, they start the fight, which ends with Guise defeating Eris. Shortly after, they bid the people farewell and leave the village in a carriage. On their way, Geese suddenly appears and joins them, telling them he would like to come alone with them to Milis. During their journey, Geese tell them stories of the 7 great powers, one of which is the dragon god, the greatest of all. Hearing this, Rudyard tells them of a dream he had when he was young about being one of the 7 great powers, which makes Rudy begin to worry about what they would do if they encounter someone Rudyard cannot defeat. Finally, they get to Milis after a few months of traveling, and Geese decides to depart from them. At night in an inn, they begin to talk, where Rudy tells them they have successfully gotten to the human territory after being teleported to the demon continent a year and some month ago, which makes them very happy. In addition, he comes up with the idea of them getting a job to raise money for their next destination boat, which they do not know how costly it would be. At that moment, Rudy shows them a sculptured figure of Rudyard he made. Then, to restore the Superd's reputation, Rudy comes up with an idea which they agree to. However, Rudy tells them he would be needing some time to make the figure in large quantities, therefore, they are taking a day off the next day, as he also needs to write a letter to his family, who he knows would have been so worried about him. Hearing this, Eris decides she's going to hunt, which makes Rudyard go with her on Rudy's instruction. The next day, while trying to write a letter to his father, but cannot think of what to write, suddenly Rudy sees someone being kidnapped on a horse and decides to go help the person because of their new goal of restoring Superd's reputation, even though he wanted to pretend he didn't see the person at first. Getting to an abandoned building, after trailing the bad men into the place, Rudy sees a female underwear while hiding and shouts, giving himself out to the men who now know they are not alone. Knowing he has been exposed, Rudy disguises himself with the underwear and tells the men to release their victim, but instead, they choose the path of chaos by calling some others. However, Rudy is able to dodge all their attacks until their leader arrives to attack Rudy. Seeing this, Rudy, being the boss in the room, uses his staff to create a wall and attack too, which leads to the leader cutting the disguise off Rudy's face, revealing his face. At that moment, Rudy realizes the gang leader is his father, Paul, after he calls his name. Later, the two go to a bar, where Rudy tells his adventures with Rudyard and Eris to his father, who stops him to talk about what happened in their village, which Rudy apologizes for as he did not check on those affected by the incident. However, while they talk about females, Rudy mentions the fact that his father is now unfaithful to his mother and jerk around ladies because of his family's absence.
Damn!
Hearing this insult, Paul punches Rudy in the face, which however leads to Rudy retaliating.
Emotional damage!
At that moment, Norn, whom Rudy recognizes as his sister, comes in and tries to talk to her, but she gets angry at him for hitting her father, which means she does not remember him. Sadly, Rudy proceeds to live when his father tells him about his search and rescue team, since everyone in the village got teleported too. Hearing this, Rudy gets disappointed and sad after he thinks everyone is fine and heads to the inn. Getting there, Ruby, after thinking about what happened, decided to go visit his father again to put an end to their differences. Shortly after, Eris and Rudyard come in and see him moody, and when he tells them what happened, Eris proceeds to storm out in anger to meet Paul, but gets stopped by Rudyard, who tells her to comfort Rudy instead. Eris, however, goes to hug Rudy and encourage him, which he is thankful for. At the bar, while Paul drinks, Guise comes in to join him and invites him to come along with him to the guild the next day. But then, he notices something is wrong with him and asks what it is, which makes Paul tell him everything that happened to him. Hearing that, Jess condemns him for putting too much on Rudy, who is just 11 years old, all because he possesses great qualities. Then he tells Paul about how much difficulties Rudy faced in the Demon Continent, which is a very harsh place, and he knows this because he himself is from there. In addition, Guise tells how pathetic Paul is for being a drunk, which Rudy would not want to see him as, therefore, he is supposed to be happy that they are both alive. Then, as he makes to leave, he tells Paul to think about what he told him when he is sober, and then takes his leave. At night in Norn's room while she is asleep, Paul begins to recall the memories of how Rudy reacted when he touched Norn's cheeks for the first time. Then suddenly, Paul begins to have bad thoughts as he imagines seeing Rudy with missing body parts. Afraid, he quickly goes to wash his face and begins to reason that he must be wrong with his actions. However, Paul decides to go make things right by going to Rudy's inn the next morning, but gets stopped by Eris, who begins to rant at him. Seeing this, Rudyard immediately takes her out of the place, leaving both father and son alone in the room. In the room, they both decide to play dumb by not talking to each other for a while, until they'd eventually choose to break the silence and have a talk. However, they talk for a while, as well as Rudy's plan to take Eris home and save his mother, Lilia, and Aisha. Hearing this, Paul tells him the whole of Fido is empty, as all the people have disappeared due to what happened, which shocks Rudy. Then the inn owner brings them free drinks and whispers to Rudy to look at his father's face, which he did, but it reminds him of his old life. However, Rudy decides to forgive his father, and they agree to pretend like no dispute happened between them. Emotionally, Rudy hugs his father after telling him to kneel and spreads his arms to embrace him as he has missed him so much, which makes Paul cry too, as he thought he had died. They finally have a heartfelt father-son moment, and it's about damn time. Moments later, Eris comes on and begins to blame Rudy for accepting his father back after everything he did, but he tells her people do make mistakes. Later, Rudy shows Eris and Rudyard the money and maps Paul gave him, and also relays the bad news of Eris's home to her, which she tells him she expected already. Then he tells him he has to leave Millis to go search for the rest of his lost family, even though Rudyard tells him he might not be able to see his father again, but Rudy knows he has to do the needful. The following morning, before Rudy and others set out on their journey, Norn is told to bid Rudy farewell but refuses, which makes Rudyard tell her to always appreciate her siblings. However, Rudy bids his father farewell, and they begin their journey to Millis. On their way, they come across different warriors whom they give Rudyard's sculptured figure after they challenge him to a duel, and he wins them all. While on the boat, Eris and Rudy get seasick. Rudyard, on the other hand, seems unaffected. He wonders why they are getting sick, but they are thrilled to get to their destination, which happens to be the central continent. Upon arrival here, Rudy thinks about the plans he has to find his family, since he has no idea if they are still alive. He gets calm when he remembers that he would be able to see Roxy in Shiron Kingdom. Meanwhile, Roxy gets told by her old friend, Nokopera, that Blaze is dead. He compliments her maturity, claiming that there is a change in her aura. She seeks to know if he is still bullying the weak, but he reveals that he hit the dead end after his last encounter with a group called the Dead End. Also, seeing how worried Roxy gets about her parents, Nokopera advises her to go and see them so she would not regret it. Following his advice, Roxy decides to visit her parents. Approaching the village, she is reminded of her not-so-good times there, where she was isolated for not being able to communicate using telepathy like everyone else. On getting there, Roxy sees an injured child and immediately heals him. But when she sees the child's mother coming, she flees the scene. She finally gets to her family house and is welcomed by her parents. They reveal that they have been hearing rumors about her and urge her to stay with them. Just then, they begin to communicate using telepathy, and this makes Roxy uncomfortable, prompting her to leave. Not wanting this, her mother goes after her, begging her to stay, but she tells her that she has an urgent journey to embark on. Just then, her mother pleads with her to make sure to come home at least once every 20 years. But she reveals that she might not come home in the next 50 years.
Damn!
Hearing this, her mother starts crying. This leaves Roxy in tears as she also remembers her life as an outcast in the village. She hugs her parents and apologizes to them for leaving the village without telling them. After breakfast the next day, she informs her parents that she has to leave in search of her apprentice, Rudy. Hearing this, her father reveals that Rudy has come with Eris and Ruger to see them. This shocks Roxy to the point that she passes out. That evening, Roxy reunites with Talnand. Not surprisingly, she meets the horny Elenalize working out. Seeing this strange sight, she uses her icicle break power to destroy the room. After that, the trio head to the demon continent in search of Zenith, Lilia, and Aisha. Later on, while they all sleep, the gods give Rudy a hint in his dream on how he would reconnect with Lilia and Aisha. When they get to Shiron Kingdom, Rudy is confident that Lilia and Aisha are there. He begs Eris and Ruger to help him gather information they can find on his family. Later on, he sets out to find the place the god had shown him in his dream. While walking around, he senses that someone is following him. This causes him to take cover as he blocks the road with his magic. At that moment, he hears the voice of a little girl screaming. When he removes the blockage, he sees the little girl being dragged away by some guards. This happened to be the vision the gods had shown him. Apparently, this little girl is his sister Aisha, and she has a letter in her hand which the guards want to take from her. Immediately, Rudy, being a wannabe big brother, helps her out and takes her to his inn. While she introduces herself to him, he remains silent about his true identity since the gods had directed him not to reveal this to her. Unfortunately, the guards succeed in taking the letter, and Rudy asks Aisha if she has any other family members in the area. Shockingly, she reveals she only has an unknown elder brother who she cannot count on because he is a perv.
Emotional damage!
At night, while Aisha sleeps, Rudy instructs Eris and Ruger to refer to him as the Kennel Master when Aisha is present. This is because he doesn't want her to know that he is the pervy elder brother she had heard about. In the morning, Rudy gets visited by a woman sent from Roxy, whose name is Ginger York. Roxy had sent her to bring Rudy. Excitedly, Rudy prepares himself to meet his master, but Ruger urges him to be careful. When they get to the palace where Roxy is, Rudy is stripped of his staff and bag, but he reads no meaning in this since he is only concerned about meeting Roxy. Walking in a room, he finds Lilia tied up and a strange man standing beside her. Before he could play superhero, he falls into a pit which strips him of his magic. The man introduces himself as Pax, the 7th Prince of Harem Kingdom. He reveals that he intends to use Rudy as bait to lure Roxy, as he has a weird fantasy of using her for his slave harem. While Rudy tries to figure out what to do, he is confident he has not gone against any of the gods' orders. Suddenly, he realizes that his stupid-headed self must have been tricked. Still in confinement, the 3rd Prince of the Kingdom, Prince Sonoba, arrives. He shows Rudy the Rugered figure that had been found in his bag. Intrigued by it, the man seeks to know if Rudy made it himself. Since Rudy didn't know why he was asking, he lies, claiming he bought it. Surprisingly, the prince was only royalty in person and not in thinking. He brings out another figure which Rudy recognizes as the one he had made for Roxy. When he sees how Zenoba stares at the figure, he begins to explain its outline. This makes Zenoba ask him again if he is the artist. This time, Rudy confirms that he is. Hearing this, Zenoba pleads with Rudy to teach him. In return, Rudy demands that he finds a way to remove the magic barrier bounding him. Desperate to make Rudy his master, Zenoba promises to make his brother Pax release him. On the other hand, some soldiers go to beg Eris and Rudyard to help them. This is because Pax had taken their family hostage to make them do his bidding. Feeling like the risen Messiah, Rudyard agrees to help. He asks Eris to take care of Aisha while he goes to free the hostages. While Eris takes Aisha to the palace, she tells her about Prince Zenoba, who is said to be blessed with superpowers. Meanwhile, Zenoba goes to get his brother to free Rudy. He carries Pax, Eris and Aisha see him, and Aisha reveals that this idiot is the one she was talking about. The two rush into the palace to save Rudy, while Zenoba tries to force his brother into doing so. Pax, being adamant, orders Ginger York to fight Zenoba, threatening to kill her family if she fails to do so. Fortunately, Eris and Aisha get to Rudy in due time. Then, Eris informs Ginger York that her family is safe since Rudyard had gone to save them. Zenoba continues to threaten Pax, forcing him to free Rudy. Leaving the palace, Lilia thanks Rudy. He seizes the opportunity to clear the misguided notion his sister Aisha has of him, and hands her a headband as a gift. In return, she apologizes for calling him a pervert, and the two part ways. On their way, Rudy, Eris, and Rudyard set up camp for the night. Eris and Rudyard take the time to practice their fighting skills, and Eris seems to have improved greatly. Feeling like the world's strongest woman, Eris asks Rudy to punch her. Just then, the tiny brain dummy ends up punching her melons instead.
It's about to go down.
Angrily, Eris lands a powerful punch on him. The next morning, the team set out and got to a snowy part, which caused Eris and Rudyard to stop walking. When he seems to know why they have stopped, they did not respond. At that moment, two strange people walk past him. While he wonders who they are, the girls urge Rudy not to move. Just then, the strange peeps hear the voice and ask Rudy if he had just heard Rudyard's voice. In response, Rudy seeks to know if the man has heard about the Fido disaster, but surprisingly he hasn't. He introduces himself as Orsted and asks Rudy if he has seen the man-god in his dream. When Rudy confirms that he has seen the man-god, Orsted charges at him. Fortunately, Rudyard steps in to save his sorry ass. He does battle with him, but his skills are no match for him, as Orsted knocks him out. With Rudyard out of the way, he comes at Rudy once again, but Eris steps in. Apparently, her improved skills get shoved away by Orsted, leaving her badly injured. With no girls to save his sorry ass, Rudy is left all alone to receive the beating of his life. He tries to use his magic, but Orsted gets ahead of him and resists it. He asks Rudy to tell the man-god that Orsted, the dragon god, would send him to the underworld. He plunges his hands into Rudy's chest, knocking him out. After Orsted leaves, Eris finds her way to Rudy in pain. He is determined not to die again and ends up passing out. In his dream, Rudy reveals everything to the man-god. He seeks to know who Orsted is, and is told that Orsted is the strongest person in the world. Orsted happens to be a cursed child, whose curse is the only thing holding him back from using his real powers. Almost getting the chance to meet Hades, Rudy is angry at the man-god. However, he wakes up to find Eris in tears. He seeks to know how he is still alive, and Eris reveals that Orsted had casted a healing spell on him after the lady with him convinced him to do so. Also, she states that Rudyard will be fine since he only passed out. Later on, Rudy has a nightmare. When he wakes up, he finds Rudyard awake. He reveals that he has got some information about the curse of Superts. He says that Rudyard can be free of the curse if he continues to do good. After a while, they arrive at Rudy's old house. Looking around reminds him of the good old days. Shortly after, Rudyard tells them that he would be leaving in search of his people. This causes Rudy and Eris to be sad, but they decide to continue their journey. The two get to another village, where Eris sees Ghislaine. On seeing them, Ghislaine is excited. However, Eris' excitement is cut short upon receiving the information that her parents and grandfather are dead. Her grandfather had been killed after being accused of being responsible for the teleportation disaster. While you'll expect Eris to be angered by this, Rudy seems to be the angry one. Eris remains calm and pays attention to what the butler has to say. He further reveals that Lord Philemon Greyat, a perverted old dummy with a weird mustache, wishes to have her as his concubine. Hearing this, Eris wishes to be alone. Going outside, Rudy sees Ghislaine with a list in her hands. This happened to be the list of people who have not been found or have been found dead. Checking the list, Rudy thankfully doesn't see his mother's name there. He also checks for Self's name and doesn't find it there. That night, Eris heads to Rudy's room, wanting them to sleep together.
It's about to go down.
While Rudy tries to process this, she jumps on him, and he finally ends up getting laid. The next morning, Rudy excitedly goes to check on Eris, but can't seem to find her. Shortly after, he sees her hair with a letter, telling him that she had to leave because she doesn't think they are a match. Immediately, he goes to ask the butler where Eris is, and he reveals that she has gone with Ghislaine. This leaves him thinking about how much of a loser he is for getting dumped. He is reminded of his life as a loner in his past life. In the midst of pain, the butler comes to inform him that they do not have water, probably wanting to take some from his tears. Angrily, Rudy asks to be left alone, but the butler orders him to leave since he is of no help to anyone. On bright side, Eris and Ghislaine continue on their journey. She states that her reason for leaving Rudy is to get stronger in order to protect him since she loves him a lot. Meanwhile, Rudyard reveals to some men he had saved earlier that he is a Superd. Surprisingly, they do not get scared. This causes him to remember what Rudy had told him about people accepting him for who he is if he continues to do good deeds. On the other hand, spends her time drinking in a bar. After passing out and waking up the next morning, she discovers the bar owner trying to sell a demon who was unable to pay for her drinks. Immediately, Roxy offers to pay for her drinks, and she introduces herself as Kashirika, the emperor of the demon world. In appreciation, she offered to grant Roxy a wish. Being a stupid dummy, Roxy says she only wishes to know the whereabouts of some people. Firstly, she asked about Paul, and is told that Paul is reunited with Lilia, his daughters. Secondly, she asked about Zainab, and is told that she only knows where Zibeth is, but it isn't clear. She asked about Rudy, and is told that Rudy is in the central continent, looking gloomy as hell. After that, Roxy thanks her and Kashirika leaves. Later on, she tells Talhand and Elinace about the information the demon gave her, and they decide to go in search of Zenith. Meanwhile, Rudy continues to think that he is no different from the low-class loser he was in his past life. However, he is consoled at the thought of the good times he had with his mother. Leaving his sordid past behind, he decides to go in search of her. If you have watched this recap till now, type "That's how you clap" in the comments. Subscribe and check out other videos. You'll definitely enjoy the story of Mikio, who is an ugly and lonely idiot who finds himself in a gaming world. Upon realizing that he can no longer return to his real world, he decides to live his best life by preparing a sexy slave harem for himself in an unending clapping festival. Has this got you wanting more? Check out our last recap and find out. Until next time, do take care and stay safe.